This is the Realme Narzo 70 Turbo, and Realme claims that in this smartphone you can play games like BGMI and Call of Duty at 90 FPS. Now the CMF Phone 1 also had the same internals, but in that smartphone you couldn't do 90 FPS, but here Realme claims that you can. So can you really achieve 90 FPS in all these competitive games? And if yes, how good and consistent is it? Does your phone heat up? Is there any throttling? So we'll find all of that in this gaming review. So let's get started. So I'll be splitting this video into 3 sections. The first one is how well can it handle smaller games. The second one is how well can it handle bigger titles at the highest settings possible. And finally, we have can it get 90 FPS. And make sure to stay till the end because we'll see how hot this smartphone gets. So starting off the smaller titles, this smartphone can handle all the smaller games that you throw at it with ease. I had no issues. I've gone through multiple games, be it Subway Surfers, some golf game, Candy Crush or Angry Birds, whatever you want, you throw at it. This smartphone can handle that with ease. So if you are someone who just likes to play very casual and very smaller titles, then this smartphone will have no issues handling that, and there's no heating or anything, so you are good to go. Now moving into the more interesting part. So we have a couple of games here like Asphalt, Call of Duty, BGMI and Genshin Impact. So for this I have kept them at the maximum settings possible, and I have to say this smartphone was kind of good. Now when it comes to Asphalt, I kept all the settings at the max. So high is the maximum preset and 60 FPS is the max frame rate you can get in this game, and this smartphone handled that and actually was at around 59, 60, 61 FPS consistently. So when it comes to Asphalt, this smartphone handled it very easily. In fact, it was better than CMF Phone 1 because in that I had to tune down the settings a little to achieve consistent frame rate. Now when you take a look at Call of Duty at the highest settings, like all maxed out, I could actually get 60 FPS without any issues. Of course, it used to drop to a little like 53, 54, 55, but I really didn't notice much. Maybe once or twice, like very, very rarely, it might drop to 45 when a lot of things are happening at the same place. Maybe at that time it might drop to 45, but other than that, this had consistent 60 FPS throughout, like 98% it was consistent 60 FPS. So if you're someone who loves keeping the graphic settings at the max, this smartphone can handle that. Now when it comes to BGMI, I kept all the settings at the max possible. So the frame rate at extreme and the graphic settings at the max possible. And with this smartphone could only achieve around 40, 39, 42. It was hovering between 39 and 42 FPS, somewhere like that consistently. I really couldn't achieve 60. Of course, you could do that if you bring down the graphical settings a bit, but you have to push sometimes to test out all these smartphones, and when you do that, you really don't get that same 60 FPS feel like what Call of Duty offered. I mean, still it was playable. I'm not saying it's not playable. It was playable, but not as smooth and 60 FPS like Call of Duty. Now finally, Genshin Impact at the max settings possible, the highest settings possible, you would get anywhere around 30, 40 FPS, something like that. It's not that great. Of course, it is a very resource intensive game, and you really can't expect in a sub 20,000 rupee smartphone to get that fluid experience, but still it's still achieved 30, 40ish frame rate at the highest settings possible. So that is kind of good. So overall, when you max out all the settings in all these demanding games, some games can achieve 60 FPS like Asphalt and Call of Duty, whereas some games like BGMI and Genshin Impact really don't touch the 60 FPS mark because these are very resource intensive, and you really can't expect that in a sub 20,000 rupees smartphone. But Realme claimed you can game at 90 FPS, so can you actually play at 90 FPS? And the answer to that is you actually can. But in order to do that, you actually need to turn on the GT mode that is available from your quick settings, the drop down menu. Because if you don't enable that, you will hover around 70 FPS or something like that. But once you turn on the GT mode, your smartphone, all the resources, your CPU, your GPU, everything gets utilized, so you will actually achieve 90 fps. But again, in order to get 90 fps, you have to put all the settings to the least. Like for example, in BGMI you have to put your settings down to smooth and then keep the frame rate at extreme plus to get 90 fps. Similar situation with Call of Duty. But be it Call of Duty or BGMI, you could actually get 90 fps in both these games. Now since this is a small screen, reducing the graphical quality really didn't affect my viewing experience that much. Maybe if it was a big 27-inch or 32 or 40-inch display, I might have noticed, but in such a small screen you really don't notice that much when it comes to how well all the things look. But the experience, getting smooth fluid animations, your character running here and there, all the things are very fluid, so actually that enhances the gaming experience, and you are much more prone to quickly moving your character to aim at your opponents. So that is kind of an advantage here. So to be honest, like Realme claimed, you can actually play games like Call of Duty and BGMI at 90 fps on the Realme Narzo 70 Turbo. And to be honest, that is a great thing, because usually you get to play games like this at those frame rates only with higher end smartphones, but getting that in a sub 20,000 rupee smartphone is actually very, very, very good. But remember, in order to play at 90 fps, you have to turn on GT mode. And with that, let's talk about the thermals. Now, when it comes to the thermals, this smartphone definitely gets hot. I mean, it's not unbearable, but it definitely gets hot, and especially when you compare it with the CMF Phone 1, this smartphone definitely gets hot. So during my testing phase, when I was playing all these games at the highest settings possible, the smartphone used to jump up to 41-42 degrees, because when I test, I play all these games for a very long time. And when you turn on GT mode in order to get 90 fps, this temperature still rises. So in my testing all these days, I actually got somewhere around 43-44 degrees, which is much higher than what you experience on the CMF Phone 1. Now of course, on the CMF Phone 1 you don't get such consistent frame rates in all these games, and of course you don't even get 90 fps. So if you're okay with tolerating the heat, then this smartphone is good. And you will feel this heat more towards around the camera area and on the sides of the smartphone. That is where you notice it very evidently. But despite getting very hot, this is a very stable smartphone. There was no thermal throttling, there was no sudden drops in frame rate once the smartphone got hot. So when you consider all that, it is actually pretty good. Now, like Realme claimed, you can actually get 90 fps gaming experience with the Realme Narzo 70 Turbo, but make sure you turn down the settings, the graphical settings, to the lowest, keep the frame rate at extreme plus, and turn on the GT mode to get 90 fps. And in my opinion, this might probably be one of the best gaming smartphones that you can buy for under 20,000 rupees. Now with coupons, you can get this for 15,000 rupees. So for 15,000 rupees, this here is a very good buy, especially if you play a lot of games and don't mind dealing with a little heat. So thanks for watching, and this here is Suman signing off once again. Catch you later.